He had $3 in his pocket, a blister on his left heel that was actively bleeding through his sock, and a view of the Seattle skyline that felt less like a city and more like a mountain of glass he was expected to climb with his bare hands. Leo Vance didn't look like a guy who was about to alter the course of American history. He looked like a 24-year-old kid who had slept in a public park, which was accurate because he had. But Leo possessed a dangerous combination of traits. He was too stubborn to die, too smart to be ignored, and possessed by a singular, burning fixation. He didn't just want to be comfortable. He wanted to be a billionaire, not for the yachts or the private islands, but because he believed that in the 21st century, absolute financial power was the only true shield against the world's cruelty. The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall. It mist-coats everything until your skin feels permanently damp and your bones ache with a dull, heavy cold. Leo stood outside the towering double doors of Vanguard Tech, watching the executives glide past him in their $1,000 wool coats. They looked at him, if they looked at him at all, as if he were a ghost, an invisible glitch in their perfect, climate-controlled reality. Leo didn't care about their stares. He cared about Marcus Vance, his estranged uncle and the CEO of Vanguard. Marcus was a man who had built an empire on software, a man who had cut Leo's branch of the family off without a dime when Leo's father went under. "You're not on the list, kid," the security guard said, his voice flat, his hand resting casually near his belt. He didn't even look at Leo's face, he just looked at the faded denim jacket and the worn-out sneakers. "Tell Marcus that his brother's son is standing here with the architecture for the next generation of neural networks," Leo said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a steady, eerie confidence that made the guard actually look up. "Tell him that if he doesn't give me 5 minutes, I'm walking across the street to his biggest competitor, and by tomorrow morning, Vanguard stock will be worth less than the paper it's printed on." It was a bluff, mostly. The drive in Leo's pocket contained code, yes, but it was raw, untested, and required a massive infrastructure to run. But Leo knew how the wealthy operated. They weren't afraid of losing money, they were terrified of someone else making it first. 10 minutes later, Leo was sitting in a room that smelled of expensive leather and old money, looking into the cold, gray eyes of Marcus Vance. Marcus didn't offer a hand. He didn't ask how Leo's mother was doing. He just leaned back in his chair, checked his watch, and sighed. "You have 3 minutes, Leo," Marcus said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of warmth. "And then I'm having you thrown out for trespassing. Your father was a dreamer, and he died broke. Don't make the mistake of following in his footsteps." "My father trusted people," Leo replied, leaning forward, placing his cracked hands flat on the polished mahogany desk. "I don't. I brought you the future, Uncle Marcus. A predictive algorithm that doesn't just analyze data, it anticipates human behavior before the subject even makes a conscious decision. I call it the Horizon Project. It's worth billions. And I want 50%. Marcus let out a dry, barking laugh that didn't reach his eyes. 50%. You're a vagrant with a flash drive, Leo. You have no leverage, no capital, and no name. I could take this drive, have my engineers reverse engineer it by midnight, and you wouldn't have enough money to hire a lawyer to sue me." "Try it," Leo whispered, his eyes locking onto Marcus's with a terrifying intensity. "The code is encrypted with a dynamic, biometric lock. It requires my DNA sequence to unlock every 24 hours. You kill me, or you steal it, and the data self-destructs into digital garbage. We do this together, or nobody does it at all." The silence in the room became heavy. Marcus stared at Leo, searching for a tremor, a blink, any sign of weakness. Finding none, a slow, predatory smile spread across the older man's face. "You really are a Vance, aren't you? Fine, we test it. If it works, we talk. If it doesn't, you disappear." For the next 6 months, Leo didn't live, he consumed and was consumed. He moved into a tiny, windowless laboratory in the basement of Vanguard Tech, working 18-hour days. His skin grew pale, his eyes bloodshot. He became a ghost inhabiting a machine. The Horizon Project was working, performing beyond anyone's wildest dreams, predicting market trends with a 99% accuracy rate. The money began to pour in, a massive, roaring river of wealth that transformed Vanguard into a global superpower. But as the numbers in Leo's bank account began to climb into the millions, the world around him began to warp. Wealth doesn't just change your life, it changes the people around you. Leo quickly realized that his success hadn't bought him friends, it had created a target on his back. The board of directors looked at this 24-year-old kid with absolute resentment. To them, he was an anomaly, an outsider who hadn't paid his dues. They started whispering in the corners of the glass offices. Then came Sarah. She was a senior data analyst assigned to his team, a woman with sharp intelligence and a quiet, calming presence that seemed to be the only thing capable of grounding Leo when his mind raced at midnight. She would bring him coffee, sit with him over lines of code, and look at him with eyes that seemed to see past the billionaire facade to the lonely kid underneath. "You need to sleep, Leo," Sarah said one evening, gently closing his laptop screen. "You've won. You're a billionaire on paper already. When is it going to be enough?" "When I'm safe," Leo said, his voice hoarse, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the coffee. "When nobody can ever take anything away from me again." "You're building a prison, not a shield," she said softly, her hand lingering on his shoulder. Leo wanted to believe her. For a moment, he let himself imagine a life outside the basement, a life where he could enjoy the immense wealth he had created. But the universe has a way of striking when you finally allow yourself to breathe. It started with a cough. A deep, hacking cough that left a metallic taste in Leo's mouth. At first, he dismissed it as exhaustion, the natural byproduct of living on caffeine and stress. But within weeks, his legs began to feel heavy, like they were filled with wet sand. His vision would blur, the code on the screens melting into abstract shapes. He secretly visited a private clinic under an assumed name, desperate to keep his weakness hidden from the predatory eyes at Vanguard. The doctor, a solemn man with a silver stethoscope, looked at Leo's scans with a grim expression that made Leo's stomach drop. "It's an aggressive, atypical neurological degradation, Mr. Vance," the doctor said, delivering the verdict with the clinical coldness of an accountant. "Your neural pathways are burning out. It's likely accelerated by extreme stress and sleep deprivation, but the root cause is genetic. It's a rare anomaly. You have, at best, 3 months before your motor functions fail entirely. There is no cure." Leo sat in the leather chair, the word billionaire suddenly sounding like a cruel joke. He had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of. He had defeated his uncle, conquered the market, and accumulated more wealth than 1,000 men could spend in a lifetime. And yet, his own body was executing a hard reset. When he returned to Vanguard, he found the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt colder. As he walked through the executive floor, people avoided his eyes. He went to his laboratory, only to find his keycard denied. The light flashed red, a harsh, buzzing rejection. Looking for this. Leo turned around to see Marcus standing at the end of the hallway, flanked by 2 large security guards. Behind them stood Sarah. She wasn't looking at Leo, she was looking at the floor, holding a tablet containing the dynamic encryption protocols Leo had spent months protecting. "What is this, Marcus?" Leo asked, his voice steady despite the sudden, terrifying numbness spreading through his left arm. "It's business, Leo," Marcus said, stepping forward. "Did you really think I'd let a petulant child dictate the future of this company forever? Sarah here is a genius with security overrides. It took her a while to mimic your biometric signature, but she managed it. You're locked out. The board has voted to terminate your contract, effective immediately." Your shares have been diluted, and your access to the funds has been frozen pending an investigation into intellectual property theft." Leo looked at Sarah, his heart breaking in a way he didn't think possible. "Sarah, why?" Sarah finally looked up, her expression cold, devoid of the warmth she had shown him in the dark hours of the lab. "Because you're obsessed, Leo. You were never going to stop. Marcus offered me a real partnership. A real future. You just wanted an audience for your obsession. You have nothing, Leo," Marcus sneered. "No money, no code, and from what my sources tell me, no time left anyway. We know you're sick. We know you're dying. You're a liability. Get out of my building." The guards moved in, grabbing Leo by his weak arms and dragging him toward the service elevator. He didn't fight them. He didn't have the strength. They threw him out into the alley behind the skyscraper, right into the pouring rain, back to exactly where he had started. For the next 2 months, Leo vanished from the world. The media reported that the young billionaire prodigy had suffered a mental breakdown and gone into hiding. In reality, Leo was living in a dilapidated cabin in the woods of western Washington, a property he had bought with a small, untraceable cash account he had kept hidden from the company. His condition worsened rapidly. Soon, he could no longer walk. He spent his days in a wheelchair, staring out at the mist-covered pine trees, his breathing shallow, his body wasting away. He was entirely alone. The world had moved on. Vanguard stock was at an all-time high, with Marcus and Sarah appearing on the covers of financial magazines as the architects of the new digital age. Leo Vance was a footnote, a ghost forgotten by the empire he had built. One evening, as a ferocious storm battered the cabin, Leo felt the final, heavy darkness creeping into the edges of his vision. His chest felt constricted, his heart fluttering like a trapped bird. He closed his eyes, letting out a final, ragged breath, letting the darkness consume him completely. The monitors in the local county hospital beeped rhythmically. The flatline tone echoed through the smaller room for exactly 42 seconds before the defibrillator paddles hit Leo's chest, sending a violent jolt of electricity through his dead body. His eyes flew open, his lungs drawing in a massive, agonizing gasp of air. He was alive, but something was different. The numbness in his limbs was gone. The constant, burning fire in his brain had subsided into a strange, cool clarity. The doctor who had treated him in secret weeks ago rushed into the room, looking at the monitors in absolute disbelief. "It's impossible," the doctor whispered, checking Leo's vitals with trembling hands. "The cardiac arrest, the sudden shock to your nervous system, it caused a massive cellular reboot. The degraded pathways, they're regenerating. The anomaly is gone, Leo. You're cured." Leo lay in the hospital bed, looking at his hands. He flexed his fingers. They were strong. He felt a surge of energy he hadn't felt in years. He was alive, he was healthy, and the world believed he was dead. It was the ultimate clean slate. 2 days later, the annual Vanguard shareholder gala was underway in the grand ballroom of the Seattle Waterfront Hotel. It was a celebration of absolute victory. Marcus Vance stood at the podium, a glass of champagne in his hand, addressing an audience of billionaires, politicians, and celebrities. Sarah stood by his side, radiant in a diamond necklace, smiling at the cameras. "We have entered an era of unprecedented predictability," Marcus announced into the microphone, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Vanguard controls the future, and the future is brighter than ever. Is it, Marcus?" The voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a cold, cutting resonance that instantly silenced the entire ballroom. The large double doors at the back of the hall swung open, and a man walked in. He wasn't wearing a faded denim jacket or a hospital gown. He was wearing a perfectly tailored, midnight black tuxedo. His hair was sharp, his eyes brilliant and full of an undeniable, terrifying life. It was Leo. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering loudly on the marble floor. Marcus's face drained of all color, his hand tightening around the podium until his knuckles turned white. You're dead," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking into the microphone. "We received the medical report. You died in the county hospital." "I did," Leo said, walking down the center aisle, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. "But I came back. And while I was away, I realized something, Uncle Marcus. You thought you stole my code. But you forgot that the Horizon Project doesn't just predict human behavior, it learns from it." Leo pulled a small, sleek remote from his pocket and pressed a single button. Instantly, the massive digital screens behind Marcus flickered. The corporate logos vanished, replaced by a cascading waterfall of internal documents, bank statements, and private emails. The screens detailed a massive, multi-billion-dollar money laundering scheme, tax evasion networks, and the explicit plans Marcus and Sarah had drawn up to illegally defraud Leo of his shares and manipulate the stock market. "What have you done?" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with panic as she watched her life dismantle in real time before the entire global media. "The Horizon Project knew exactly when you would try to lock me out," Leo explained, his voice calm, almost sympathetic as he reached the stage. "It built a backdoor into the system the moment Sarah tried to copy my biometrics. Every piece of data you've processed over the last 2 months hasn't been building your empire, it's been compiling evidence for the Department of Justice. The FBI is outside the doors right now, Marcus." As if on cue, the heavy doors of the ballroom burst open again, and dozens of federal agents in tactical gear poured into the room, moving directly toward the stage. Marcus collapsed into a nearby chair, his face a mask of absolute ruin. Sarah began to weep openly, reaching out toward Leo, begging for mercy with her eyes. Leo didn't look at her. He turned his back on them, looking out at the stunning view of the Seattle harbor through the massive glass windows. He had won. He had his billions back, his health was restored, and his enemies were ruined. He was the most powerful young man in the country. But as Leo stood there, watching the flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers reflect off the dark waters of the Pacific Northwest, he didn't feel the euphoric rush of victory he had always expected. He felt a profound, echoing emptiness. He looked around the room at the hundreds of wealthy people who were now looking at him with awe and terror, realizing that not a single person in that room, or perhaps in the entire world, actually knew him or cared about him. He had built his shield. He had built his prison. And as the cameras flashed, immortalizing his triumph to the world, the billionaire who had conquered death stood entirely alone in the light.